I don't wanna be the boy that runs in the back. I don't wanna be the kid that falls in the dark. All I really want to be is the guy that gets that girl.
Welcome to the AJ Steele Show. We discuss politics, sex, money, and everything in between. And now, here's your host, an immigrant, a self-made millionaire, an American, AJ Steele.
Everything I say and do, I'm just not good enough for you. I don't wanna be the boy.
Welcome to the AJ Steele Show. It is so nice to be back with all of you. When my family first came to America, we were extremely poor. And on very rare occasions, my mom and dad would treat us, my sisters and I, to Chinese food. And as kids, we used to love to go to that Chinese restaurant because of all the strange waiters and the strange language. And obviously, what was very exotic for us back then was the Chinese food. But the most important thing for us, or the most interesting thing for us, was a big aquarium that sat in the corner and had lots of live crabs in it. Watching this big, dirty aquarium for what seemed like hours back then taught me some important lessons about life, about Chinese people, and about America. But we will talk about the Chinese restaurant and all the lessons I learned over there a little bit later in this show. But right now, I want to talk about all the things that are happening to our country. The stock market is down almost 10,000 points. Early GDP forecasts are telling us that our economy is going to contract for the next few quarters. According to all of these experts, both the US and Europe are going to show negative growth. Right now in America, we have 10 million new unemployed people. 10 million new people on the unemployment rolls. And all I hear from the media is, don't call it the Wuhan virus. Don't call this virus the Chinese virus. Don't be xenophobic. Well, I'm sick of it. Our country is losing every day. Every day we're falling behind more and more. China is and always has been our enemy. I don't trust them one bit. And I'm sick and tired of our media and all the globalists and their Democratic Party enablers telling us that they are our friends. They're not our friends. Let's just talk about this virus. The Wuhan virus was first detected around October 2019 in Wuhan. Interestingly enough, Wuhan has the only level 4 biohazard lab in all of China. Right there, a few hours away from that famous market where people supposedly ate bats and got the Wuhan virus, or COVID-19, or the Chinese coronavirus, whatever the heck you want to call it. That's where it started, right there, smack dab in China. Now, China completely hid the existence of this virus from the entire world, and they kept doing their Chinese New Year parties and festivities and all that kind of junk. And they never stopped sending Chinese tourists and advisors and professional spies and thieves to the rest of the world. As a matter of fact, America had about 500,000 tourists from China during that time period. So these commie bastards in China hid the whole thing. And then in January, how nice, they finally announced to the world that they have an outbreak. Now what they did is they started quarantining small parts of China. Now, to us, 50 million people is a lot. But to a country that has 1.5 billion citizens, 50 million people is not that much. They put all those people in quarantine. But again, the cat was already out of the bag. Don't forget, massive amounts of Chinese visitors were infecting us in America, in Europe, in the Middle East, the rest of Asia, Australia, and Africa. And because of this sneaky, unscrupulous, potentially criminal behavior by China, the rest of the world had to go on lockdown by February. All of the economies are shocked. Stock markets are plunging. Unemployment is rampant. People are dying everywhere in Europe and in America. And this is the interesting part. By early March, China starts reopening for business. Business as usual for China. Their factories are currently working at 98% capacity. While here in America, all of our factories are shut down and the economy is tanking even more day by day. And people are getting very, very depressed and very hopeless. But meanwhile, we're very lucky to have President Trump, who's trying his best to be America's cheerleader, trying to get us out of our panic, trying to return us to the economy that less than 3 months ago was the greatest economy in the world. Yes, if you remember, about 3 months ago, we had one of the best economies in the whole world. And now we're all of a sudden on the cusp of a depression. But as you know, and as we all expect, the media and the Democratic Party are doing the best they can to tear President Trump down and in effect give comfort and help to our biggest, most dangerous enemy, China, the country that caused all of this mess to begin with. So while these self-hating traitors, the Democrats and the media and the globalists are bashing America, good old China is wide open for business, selling their crap merchandise to us and to the rest of the world, while our businesses are shuttered down. So who is really winning in all of this? Do you think that anyone could have written a better script for China and their globalist enablers? Do you really think that all of this is a coincidence? When we get back, I'm going to explain how China became our number one enemy in this world, and how the globalists and the media and most Democratic politicians and most Republican politicians let this happen, how they all sold out our country for the god of money. And no, I didn't forget at all. When we get back, I'm also going to tell you the story of how a little immigrant boy learned important life lessons by watching a crab aquarium in a small Chinese restaurant in San Francisco. Now, before we take our little break, I'd like to say thank you to all of our fans and all the people that follow us on Twitter and Facebook and send us great emails. And please remember to subscribe to our show and spread the word to all of your friends. Our show has reached the top 40 in all of America, and we want to be in the top 10. Heck, why not? It's the American way, right? We'll be right back with our discussion of China.
All I really want to be is the guy that gets the girl.
The AJ Steele Show. Think of your loudmouth best friend, hated by all the wives, because he tells it just like it is.
Finally see your love belongs to me.
Welcome back to the AJ Steele Show. I have so much to tell you about China. So where do I start? The other day, I read an article from Xinhua, the state-run media agency of China, which stated that China could impose pharmaceutical export controls, which would plunge America into the mighty sea of coronavirus. So how did we get to this point? The point where China is basically saying, we're not going to send you any medication, any life-saving medication for the coronavirus and for other infections, bacterial infections, which would be antibiotics in that case, pain medication, all that stuff that we need to survive. And this includes complicated stuff like surgical equipment, machines, computers, and even simple products like gloves and masks. How did we get to a point where China can threaten us like this? Why is it that they produce about 80 to 90% of all the medical supplies of America? What happened to our industries and manufacturing? What happened to our great industrial base? If you really want to know the answer, we're going to have to start from the beginning. And I highly suspect that you're not going to like what I have to tell you. When I was a kid, when I came to America back in 1983, we were quite poor. And we didn't go out much. The two main kind of foods that my parents took me out to eat were either McDonald's. I still remember eating 2 burgers for $1, and that was such a big deal for us. My dad never ordered Coke because that was expensive. Or if we did order Coke, we always ordered it without the ice. Because in our little immigrant minds, we thought we were getting a lot more Coke that way and less water. That's what's called poor people's logic. Now, there was another kind of food that we used to go out to on special occasions, very rare special occasions. Chinese food in a Chinese restaurant. Back in 83, Chinese food and Chinese people were a lot more exotic. Yes, we had Chinatown in San Francisco and there were lots of Chinese people there. But the whole concept of eating Chinese food, the whole notion of communist China and the Orient and all the mystery, all that stuff was so fascinating to me and my family. And I suppose to many other Americans as well. It was almost like going to another world. The waiters were a little different. They were a little ruder, they're a little rougher. But the food was so good. It was so fun to go to eat there with chopsticks and meet all these people and see all of these interactions. The hostess, usually an older Chinese woman, was yelling at the waiter, and then the waiter went and yelled in Chinese at the cooks. And this back and forth stuff was so much fun for us kids because we didn't really know any Chinese people at the time. To be honest, before we started going to Chinese restaurants, the only Chinese guy we've ever heard of was Bruce Lee. And he was so cool. You remember him, that tough Chinese kung fu guy. He was short and he was thin and he beat up all those big guys. He gave all of us skinny kids lots of hope. He was wearing all those funky clothes and he had those black suits and stuff. And then when we went to the Chinese restaurants, the waiters were wearing the same kind of stuff. And all of us kids thought that these waiters were some mysterious kung fu fighters also. And it was such an interesting, cool phenomena for us. Now for my sisters and I, probably the most fun thing to do in a Chinese restaurant, other than sticking the chopsticks in our noses, was to go look at the big aquarium that was full of crabs. Full of live crabs. And we used to just stare at those for hours. It was what seemed like hundreds of Dungeness crabs in a dirty, big aquarium. And they were moving around, trying to snap at things. And there were always a few crabs climbing, trying to climb out to safety, to freedom. And whenever a gutsy crab or maybe, a more athletic crab almost made it out and was able to climb above all the rest, all of a sudden you'd see a claw coming out of nowhere, out of that heap of crabs, and pull it back down. Now my family and I, we never ate crabs. We weren't a crustacean type people, and plus we couldn't afford them anyway. We stuck to things like beef chow mein and cashew nut chicken. God, we were so innocent back then. It's amazing. And then some Chinese waiter would go into the crab aquarium and the customer would pick a crab they wanted to eat, and he'd callously just grab him out with his big tongs and take him out and obviously take it back to the kitchen to cook it. And we thought that was so sad. Our hearts were broken to just watch that because we're thinking, oh man, this crab is going to be thrown into a freaking pan right now. But that's the way of life. And these waiters were so callous about the way they picked them out. I don't think we were mad at them as kids, but it was very sad for us to see those filthy, overcrowded aquariums, to see the few crabs that tried to escape, and to finally see this rough Chinese waiter, usually smoking a cigarette, I think, just grabbing them and taking them away. But these were good lessons. These were lessons about life. These were lessons about food. And there's nothing wrong with them. It's the way things are. And it's the way things were back then, and in some ways, they're exactly the same. Except for nowadays, America has become that big filthy aquarium. And us American citizens, middle class, poor, young, old, we're the crabs. We've become those pathetic crabs that constantly claw at each other, constantly trying to pull each other down, not realizing that we're trapped in this aquarium together. And instead of a Chinese waiter with a cigarette in his mouth coming to take us out, instead of him controlling the situation, it is the Communist Republic of China that now controls our fate. The Chinese now control everything that we do. What we eat, the tools we use for work, the toys we play with, the phones that we use, our TVs, our entertainment, our 5G networks, and much, much worse. Even the medications that we need when we get sick. I don't want to be that crab. I don't want to be that crab anymore. I don't want any of my fellow Americans to feel like they're trapped in this hopeless, horrible aquarium. When we get back, I want to talk some more about China and what they're doing to America and our morale. And I want to talk a little bit about how we get out of this mess that we dug ourselves into. But I want you to realize just one thing. This aquarium wasn't built by China. Not at all. The aquarium was built by the globalists, by the huge mega billion-dollar greedy American corporations. and all the politicians that support them and are controlled by them. They built the aquarium that keeps us locked up, not the Chinese. The Chinese waiter that took the crab out of the aquarium didn't own the restaurant. That Chinese restaurant was probably leased to that hard-working Chinese family by some liberal billionaire or millionaire from San Francisco. The person owning those buildings could have been greedy Dianne Feinstein, yes, the senator from California, and her greedy husband. Or maybe Nancy Pelosi or Gavin Newsom or the Getty family. All of these phony virtue-signaling liberals own tons of real estate in California, and they do lots of business with China. They are the ones who are enslaving us to China. They are the ones who are selling our country down the drain just so they can get richer and richer. The Chinese are not to blame. They're just the ones taking advantage of our greed and stupidity. I'm not even mad at the Chinese. They've always been our enemy. China has always been America's enemy, and they want to take over the world. But I don't blame them for that. They're doing what it takes to make their country the greatest country in the world. They're doing the same thing we should be doing for our country. It's our politicians and corporations that sold us down the river that I'm blaming. I'm talking about the Bidens and the Pelosi's and Obama and Clinton and George Bush and all of his cronies. But I'm also talking about Nike and the National Basketball Association and Apple and Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Walmart and Costco. The list is very long. They're getting rich while we're stuck fighting each other for every last scrap, just like those crabs in that filthy, overcrowded aquarium. I'm just getting started. Let me take a little break and I'll be right back. This is the AJ Steele Show.
You're listening to the AJ Steele Show, where no topic is off limits, no discussion too harsh, no truth more true. The AJ Steele Show, we tell it like it is.
All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl. All I really want to be.
Welcome back. We're talking about China, and I'm thinking to myself, would anyone in my audience or anyone in America, would they ever put it past the Chinese to have actually started this global pandemic on purpose? Does anyone out there believe that they care about human life, even their own people's lives? Does anyone out there think that the government of China would care if Chinese people's lives were lost as long as it served the purpose of the state? Now, I don't know if China started this whole virus on purpose, if there was some kind of a master plan to target the United States and Europe and complete their quest to dominate the entire universe, but I would not be surprised. And why is that? Because I know the history of China, and more specifically, the completely brutal history of communist China. I don't think a lot of Americans, especially the liberal types, the ones that tell us that China is just a competitor and is our friend, I don't think they realize how evil China has been to its own citizens and the rest of the world since it's become a communist nation. Communism started in China, and it was led by a man named Mao Zedong, and he actually led to the deaths of over 45 million Chinese residents, Chinese people. I'm not talking about wars with other countries, but in order to take over China, he killed over 45 million of his own countrymen. So these people are very notorious for being ruthless and completely heartless. So I don't trust them one bit just for that fact alone. So if you think they would mind killing 20, 30, 40,000 Chinese, heck, even killing a few million Chinese that they don't like in order to advance their agenda, then you're a fool. The Chinese government, as we speak right now, has millions of people in re-education camps because they don't like their politics. They also are extremely angry at the people in Hong Kong and the rest of the Chinese people that would like to have some freedom. So this whole virus thing's happened in a very, very convenient time. Now, it could be coincidence, absolutely. But do I believe in coincidences? Maybe a little bit, but not too much when it comes to these communist regimes. They are obviously self-serving. They don't really care for the rest of the world. They have absolute zero concern for human rights, and they don't really care about their own people. So why would you put anything past them? In my mind, you'd have to be a complete fool or somebody that absolutely supports and profits from China, or someone who absolutely hates America if you believe a word that comes out of the Chinese administration. But let's forget about all of these Chinese internal issues and try to examine how we became so indebted to these people. Why is it that America, the most powerful country in the world, the most successful industrial nation on earth, has become beholden and indebted to China? Well, the story begins with a visit from an American president in 1972. Some people call him Tricky Dick. I just call him President Nixon. In 1972, there was a big brouhaha all over the media when he finally went to China. He opened up a relationship with China, and this was hailed as a new beginning, a new opening of relationship between East and West, and capitalism and communism. But unfortunately, what Nixon did was also open a Pandora's box of globalism, and he gave these ruthless Chinese communists absolute legitimacy. Now, why did he go to China? Because America needed new markets for its product, and he thought that because there's so many people in China, that whole country will become a ready-made market for all of our products, our cars, our TVs, our radios, our heavy equipment, and the list goes on and on. But unfeathered capitalism has its own limits, and capitalism can actually turn into a double-edged sword, which is exactly what happened to the United States of America. Instead of us being the people who sell stuff to China, China became the powerhouse and we started a long decline. Why? Because the Chinese had very cheap labor, some of it even slave labor. They were willing to steal, to cheat, to lie, and to undersell American companies. They never intended to buy American products. They planned all along to steal our ideas, to steal our designs, and make those products for peanuts. So in the beginning, they did buy some stuff from us, stuff like heavy equipment, airplanes, some computers, but the whole time they were doing that, they were slowly building up their factories and industrial base. And they started out by making cheap toys and trinkets and clothing, which were a lot cheaper to make over there than here in the US. And then eventually, they started making TVs, smartphones, computer chips, 80 to 90% of all of our medications, and even cars. Slowly but surely, they completely destroyed all of our factories and they flooded our markets with cheap Chinese crap. Now, that was just the beginning. In addition to selling us stuff for so cheap that American factories couldn't compete, they started sending all of their college students to our universities. And our universities, our left-wing, America-hating universities, just loved them because this was another income, just another revenue stream for them. Now, none of these Chinese students from mainland China took any classes about humanities and psychology and gender reassignment. No, they weren't very busy with that. They took classes in engineering, in computer design, and medical technology. They were studying the important subjects, things that help a country grow, things that help economies to become powerhouses. All the while, most American kids are in college studying sociology and ethnic studies and feminism and all about the massacres of the Native Americans by the white people. The Chinese were studying science, while our idiot American kids were studying crap. Crap that doesn't apply to anything, crap that doesn't help anything, crap that will not produce a single good job or a single product. Our American kids were busy wasting their time learning how to hate America, while the Chinese were getting smarter and smarter and transferring all that information back to mainland China. And not only that, many of these Chinese kids that learn in American schools, and again, I'm talking about Chinese from mainland China, I'm not talking about Chinese Americans, they got jobs in Detroit learning how to make cars and working for GE and working right here in Silicon Valley. And the greedy company managers and the stockholders just loved them because they worked for half price and they didn't complain. But while they were here working for half price, they learned how our system works. And they stole all of our knowledge, all of our information, all of our patents, and transferred them to China. In other words, they took the beauty of capitalism because we're so stupid and free and open and fair and not xenophobic. They took all the hard work of Americans, all the information, all the millions of hours of study and research in labs, and all the billions of dollars we've invested in R&D, and they gave it to China for free. They stole us blind in broad daylight, and we let it happen because of our greed, our virtue signaling, and our naivete. And you wonder why they're ahead and we're behind. Yes, you wonder why we don't make any more TVs or any computers or any radios or any smartphones for that matter. You wonder why people that used to make things in America and make a good living are now working for Walmart or for Target or for Costco or flipping burgers at McDonald's and Burger King. We used to be a nation of builders. We used to be a nation that created things. You know what we do now? We're a nation of consumers and sad, hopeless sacks working in service industries, for heaven's sake. We've become a nation of slaves. Slaves to China and slaves to the American globalists who don't give a damn about America. We don't make much anymore. We still make cars and we still make planes. But that's not going to last for too long because they're making cars in China now. And soon they'll be making airplanes too. So they sell us all the junk we buy in the stores. They sell us all of our electronics. They sell us most of our clothes. And what do we sell China? We sell them grains and beef and recyclable trash. We've become the backwater. We sell them grain and they sell us computers. They steal our intellectual property that we spend billions of dollars to invent and develop. And then they sell our own inventions back to us at top dollar. No wonder we have such a huge trade deficit with China. But that's not the worst part. Because we have such a big deficit and because we spend so much money in America and we don't bring money in, we have to borrow money. And guess who we borrow money from? You guessed it right. China. China is one of the main creditors of America. So China actually owns a lot of our debt. We owe billions and billions of dollars with interest to China. The same country that's screwing us over, the same country that's stealing us blind, the same country that gave us the Wuhan virus. We owe them money. And don't forget that $2.2 trillion that our government promised us, and I'm sure it's going to be a lot more than that when it's all said and done, that whole package, that whole virus relief package is borrowed money. And who do you think America borrows the money from? It's very sad to realize that the country that we love so much is basically being raped on a daily basis by China. And when that horrible rape is over, we have to say thank you and pay him some more to rape us again tomorrow. And just like a person who keeps borrowing money on a credit card, a person without a job who's sinking deeper and deeper, and the debt gets higher and higher and never gets from under it because the interest rates keep going up. That's what America has become. Didn't America fight a war to kick off someone just like China? I think it was a country called England, and I think it was run by King George. Is it time for another war of independence? Is it time to make sure we're free again? Isn't it time to make our own products again and run our own country ourselves? Isn't it about time that we stop China from running us ragged? It's absolutely time. But don't forget, even in the War of Independence, yes, even during the American Revolution, there were many American traitors who betrayed America. There were plenty of self-serving Americans who wanted to work with England because they profited by screwing the colonies, by screwing over the American people. Every era has its own Benedict Arnolds. And today's era, those Benedict Arnolds are represented by the media and Hollywood, many of our sniveling politicians, and by the major globalist corporations that want to keep our relationships going with China so they can make more and more money off of the backs of hardworking Americans. When we return to the AJ Steele Show, we're going to talk about all those so-called Americans who sold out America. Don't go anywhere.
AJ Steele. Not right, not left, just right.
Ollie. Don't sting like Howards and don't cry like a pussy.
Welcome back to the AJ Steele Show. China has had a predatory relationship with the United States and the rest of the world ever since the early 70s. Just remember that we have a trade deficit with China that is $500 billion per year. In other words, we lose that amount every year because they sell us $500 billion more of product than we sell them. So why don't we put a stop to that? Well, because China has lots of cheerleaders in America. Huge companies like Apple, who makes most of their product in China and Asia. Walmart, who buys most of their crap from China. Nike, who basically uses Chinese forced labor to make their crappy shoes in China and then sell it to us for hundreds of dollars. And then they call themselves a woke company and they get Colin Kaepernick to promote them. Yeah, Nike is one of the worst abusers of America, and they make all their crap in China, but they love that deal. And Wall Street banks like them, our ports like them, our airlines, our shipping companies, and all the greedy product importers because they want to continue making money at the expense of American factories and industries. And don't forget, they are the ones destroying the livelihood of American workers. They are the ones that are destroying the unions, which interestingly enough, don't say a peep about China. Why is that? Because they've also been bought by China. Not just them. Most of our politicians are bought by the Chinese. They have investments in China, and they also receive large amounts of financial support from Chinese-sponsored super PACs. So the Chinese do whatever they want. Let's talk about colleges. Do you know that China controls most of our college science departments? Because they send millions and millions of dollars in grants. They basically bought off our entire college system and all of our research labs, to the point that most college administrators these days are nothing but mouthpieces for China. Not to mention all the students that come from China and study at our college institutions for full pay. The greed of our colleges, the greed of our universities is why they're being controlled by China and why they continue to support unabated Chinese interference in our markets. But do you really think that Chinese influence ends with politicians and colleges and think tanks? You're wrong. China has invested billions of dollars in our ports. They control what comes here and what goes here. Not only that, they own lots of real estate in America. They have bought single-family residences, they've bought apartments, they control a huge part of our real estate, and they also own many of our factories that you think are American-owned. So they own the politicians, they own the schools, they own a bunch of our ports, they control a big part of our infrastructure, and they have direct and indirect influence over many of our newspapers. But don't forget, they also have a complete lock over 80% of our electronics market. All of our phones, all of our computers, I would say 80 to 90% of those are produced overseas. And probably the scariest part is the fact that about 80% of our pharmaceutical supplies, our medications, are made in China. Our antibiotics, our painkillers, our narcotics, everything we use in the hospital, or not everything, about 80% of it is made in China. They control our healthcare. And not just medications. A lot of the machines that we use in the hospitals, like ventilators and pulse oximeters and all those kind of things, are also made in China. And our masks and our gowns and our specialty shoes, all that stuff is made in China. They control our healthcare industry. And what do? We say boo, because we keep buying their crap because it's cheap. And our greedy hospitals like their stuff. It's not half as good as the American-made stuff, but our whole hospital, our whole medical industry is based on profit, and they want to buy Chinese crap. And they don't care that China has almost unfeathered control of our entire medical supply lines, and that's how they control medicine in the US. Just imagine the power they have to just destroy all of America by cutting out on, let's say, antibiotics for about 3 months. Do you know how many people would die in this country because of it? All the pneumonias, all the infections, all the increased danger to surgeries and dental procedures. We can also talk about Hollywood and the NBA and all the other entertainment companies, Netflix, Google, Facebook, Twitter, all of these other greedy, blood-sucking companies that became gazillionaires off of the American consumer. And now they're basically telling us to go to hell. And do you know why they're so beholden to China? Because China invests very heavily in these industries, and also because they want an end to the Chinese market. There's 1.5 billion people in China. There's 350 million people in America. It's just simple math for them. They don't care about America. They don't care about the Americans that made them rich. They have no patriotism. It's just simple math for them. Follow the Benjamins. Or maybe just follow the Yuans in this case. All of these virtue signaling companies that do nothing but preach to us about human rights and LGBTQ rights and feminism, all of them won't dare say a peep to China about their human rights abuses and about the fact that they make children work for 14 hours a day and about the fact that they have slave labor camps. Not a peep from these nasty American companies. I could go on and on about all of these globalist monsters that we've created right here in the US, but I think we have much bigger problems than even that. I mean, how many of you even know that our military industries and our car and auto industries are completely dependent on China for certain parts that we just don't make here in the USA? We can't build our planes. We can't build our tanks. We can't build our missiles or drones. We can't even build Ford and Chevy trucks without some components that are exclusively made in China. Think about it. If, God forbid, we ever got in a war with China or one of its allies, do you think they would send us the components we need to build our weapons? We'd be sitting ducks. We're in grave danger. We wouldn't have weapons. We wouldn't have tanks and airplanes and bombs. We wouldn't even have trucks to haul stuff around. And on top of it, you know that they would stop sending us antibiotics and medications. So we couldn't even save our own soldiers. I don't even want to start talking about the 5G networks that they have that are going to control communications throughout the whole world. Look, we're losing this battle. And we're losing it because of American greed, because of the globalist greed, because China has bought all of our politicians and all of our companies, and because we just lost the will to fight. And we can't keep this up anymore. We just can't do it. Best case scenario, we just become a backwater country. We become a colony of China. But worst case scenario, we lose our freedom and we lose our country. I know I'm talking about alarming things, but this is history. This has happened all throughout history. Great empires, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Greek Empire, the Egyptian Empire, they all fell because of all of their internal corruption and strife. And because other entities, other countries were outthinking them, outproducing them, outmaneuvering them. And that's where we're headed. We're being outmaneuvered by China on a daily basis. And believe it or not, it's not because the Chinese are so smart. Despite anything you might hear in the media, America still has more patents and more inventions and more new ideas than any other country in the world. The Chinese can't even touch us when it comes to innovation and outside-the-box thinking. The reason we're being outmaneuvered is because of our politicians and because of the nasty, globalist-based American companies that would rather answer to the stockholders than to the American people. But it's not just here. Many countries in Europe and in Africa and in Asia and even parts of Australia, they owe China a lot of money because of loans and grants and infrastructure improvements that are part of the Chinese initiative called the Belt and Road Initiative. Look, we're not the only ones selling our soul to the devil. We're not the only country that's getting screwed over by China. But America is the beacon of hope for the entire world. If we falter, the rest of the world falters. And trust me, China is not cute or nice. It is a brutal country with a nasty government and a terrible dogma that will plunge the earth back into the dark ages. And if you want any proof of that, just remember that China is the main sponsor and supporter of the Islamic Republic of Iran and of North Korea. The Chinese are constantly undermining our sanctions on those countries, and they're buying oil from them, and they break our embargoes. They're basically enabling all those evil regimes. And if it wasn't for China, the mullahs of Iran and little rocket man Kim Jong-un, they would be gone. They wouldn't be harassing the world and terrorizing it with nuclear weapon threats. And China is doing this on purpose. They're absolutely destabilizing the whole world for more power and more money. And all the idiots in Hollywood and the media and the European Union and the United Nations and all the liberals that hate America and complain about it nonstop, they're really going to rue the day when China takes over. But none of this has to happen. Nothing is written in stone yet, even though it's getting very, very late in the game. But as patriotic Americans, there's still a few things we can do to make sure China does not infringe on our freedoms and does not take over America and the rest of the world. And when we get back from our little break, I'm going to give you the AJ Steele Show prescription on how to get rid of the China virus. And no, I'm not talking about the Wuhan virus. I'm talking about the virus of communist China.
All I really want to be is the guy that gets the girl.
The AJ Steele Show. Think of your loudmouth best friend, hated by all the wives, because he tells it just like it is.
Finally see your love belongs to me.
Welcome back to the last segment of the AJ Steele Show. I hope you're enjoying our little discussion about China. We've covered many reasons why I think China is the most dangerous enemy America has. And I also stated that I'm not mad at China or even surprised at China for wanting to become the top dog in this world. That's what competitors do. That's what enemies do. They try to get the upper hand. What I am surprised at, though, is how many American corporations and how our media and universities and even how many politicians on both sides of the aisle are blindly supporting China to the detriment of their own country, America. But I guess I shouldn't really be surprised. Companies like Shell Oil, you remember them? Shell Gas and Oil? They sold gasoline to Hitler, to Nazi Germany. And just recently, 3M, the American manufacturers of N95 masks for medical purposes, they were selling masks to other countries who were paying cash, even though here in the U.S. we're in the midst of one of the worst pandemics ever. These low-life pieces of scum were selling masks to other countries instead of providing them to doctors and hospitals right here in America. Doctors that could help their own employees. Doctors and nurses that could save their own families. Can you believe this crap? I really hope that there's a special place in hell for the people that run 3M. Shame on them. Look, I could go on all day and tell you about all the unscrupulous companies that we have here in America, but I believe that there's some kind of a justice in this world, and I believe they'll get theirs. What we need to do right now is come up with solutions. We need to figure out how to deal with the China problem and also how to deal with our internal enemies. And this is what I think we need to do. Number one, we need to re-elect President Donald Trump. He is the only one out there with enough guts and enough insight to understand how dangerous China is. He's been campaigning on that 5-6 years ago. He's been talking about that for over 30 years, and he's absolutely right. China is our enemy, and we have to wake up to that danger. Number two, we have to stop outsourcing jobs and start making things in America. I would tax the bejesus out of any American company that makes products in China that could be made right here in America. I would also give tax incentives to companies that are returning to America from China. Number three, I would increase the current tariffs on any cheap products that come from China with the purpose of displacing American workers and bankrupting American factories. Look, China and other countries are dumping product on our shores at their cost or even at below their cost just so they can undermine American manufacturing. That's got to stop. Number four, we have to make sure, we have to actually mandate that 70% of all medicine and all medical supplies that we use here are made in America. We can't ever be dependent on China or any other countries for our essential medical supplies. Number five, we have to mandate that any products that are used by the military, including airplanes, tanks, cars, and weapons, are built with 100% American-made parts. We should never allow any other country to hold us hostage because we need their parts to protect ourselves. Number six, we should punish China for any intellectual property theft and confiscate any products that they make that use unlicensed American inventions and patents. Also, we should never let any more Chinese students from mainland China to attend our universities. And we should absolutely not allow Communist China to endow any American institutions. That means China cannot give any more money to any universities. They cannot give any money to any American politicians. They cannot donate money to any super PACs. We need to absolutely stop their money for influence initiative, and stop it now. Number 7, China is the cause of the Wuhan virus. They are the ones that either spread it on purpose or, in a best case scenario, misled the whole world about it. They need to pay for it. China should pay for the whole cost of us fighting this horrible virus. They should pay for everything they've done through either negligence or just pure deceit and evil. Number 8, we need to defund and close down the United Nations and the World Health Organization, because both of these bodies are completely biased and completely under China's control. We don't need these bloated anti-American organizations anymore. They do nothing for America, and as a matter of fact, they do nothing for the world. Shut them down. Number 9, put increasing pressure on any country in the world that does extensive business with China. The spread of the cancer of China has to be stopped, and stopped as soon as possible, because the more it spreads its tentacles all over the world, the weaker America becomes, and the weaker the whole Western world becomes. China has to be stopped, and very soon. And number 10 is probably the most important one, and it's the most consequential thing we can do as individuals. Buy American. Don't buy crap from China. Don't buy crap from other countries. Support our own manufacturing base and buy American. My dear departed grandma always used to tell me, you get what you pay for. You buy cheap crap, you get cheap crap. And you know what? If you buy Chinese stuff, you are helping to sell your country down the drain. And in the process, you're sealing your own fate. This is the AJ Steele Show. I hope you enjoyed listening, and I hope to be back with you very, very soon. Take care, stay safe, and be healthy.
All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl. All I really want to be. All I really want to be is a guy that gets the girl.
The AJ Steele Show. Copyrighted 2020.